Hi everyone, join me today as I sketch this windmill using ink and watercolor. For today's sketch I'm going to use a Stillman & Burn sketchbook. It is a beta series sketchbook with mixed media paper with a weighting of 270 GSM. Supplies for today include a pencil and eraser, a Pigma Micron pen size 0.5. I've got two silver black velvet brushes in size 8 and 12, a palette of paints, spray bottle, palette for mixing, water, and tissue paper for blotting. I am going to start with my pencil sketch already down on the page, and I'm going to begin working with my Pigma Micron permanent marker pen in size 0.5. The free downloadable and traceable PDF for this sketch is available if you click on the link in the description box below. You can feel free to trace the outline and then join me as we begin with the pen work. If instead you would prefer to sketch it on your own, then I would say follow along in pencil with what I'm doing in pen now, and then once your pencil sketch is down, you can go over it again in your marker pen. I really enjoy working with these Pigma Micron pens. They are so versatile and they come in so many different sizes depending on the size of the sketch that you're doing. If I'm working on quite a big sketch as I am here, I will work in a size 0.5 and then maybe go with a thicker line weight when I'm doing some shadow lines or some heavier lines. But these pens even come in sizes as small as 0.005 for really small sketches. During the month of October, I joined the Inktober challenge for the first time. It's a challenge that runs every year in October and gives you a daily prompt word that you are then encouraged to try and sketch something that accommodates that prompt word. It really was quite a challenge to sketch something every day, and I found that some of the prompts were easier than others. But for that challenge, I worked in a really small sketchbook, and for those sketches, I worked most of the time in a Micron pen size 0.1 because the sketches were so small. I held myself accountable during the month of October by declaring up front that I was going to do it, so I wasn't able to skip any of the days, and I actually recorded a quick video each day that I sketched in my sketchbook, and if you want to have a look at those, there is an album under my profile in which you can have a look at the daily Inktober sketches if you wish. Back to this sketch now. You'll see that I'm working through with the Pigma Micron pen, and I'm trying to not keep my lines awfully straight. I do have a tendency to get my lines a little bit too straight at times, and having a little bit of a wobble to the lines does give a bit more spontaneity and character to the sketch. So I don't mind a wobble here or there and for the lines to not be perfectly straight. You will see that I've also made the decision to just draw the main body of the windmill and not to draw the connected buildings on the side. That was just a decision that I made, that I wanted to keep the focus on the windmill and not to have the surrounding buildings. So I will just fill in the background behind the windmill with foliage. Now onto the watercolor layer. I'm going to moisten the paints first just to activate them using a spray bottle. Then I'm going to make a very, very weak consistency mix of sepia and use that to put a base layer down on the top half of the windmill. I'm not doing any shadow or anything at this stage. I'm just getting a weak base layer down just to get the basic color down. And I'm just making sure that I miss out the bottom windmill blade and paint around that. Now for the bottom layer, I'm mixing together buff titanium with the smallest bit of yellow ochre added. I will skip out the far right panel of the windmill that's got a brick color to it, but I will use this color for the left two panels. I will use Payne's Grey for the top lid of the windmill. I'm making sure not to touch the sepia that I've put down so that the colors don't mix. And I will use the same color for the door. I'm just going to thicken the sepia mix a bit and use that for the blades of the windmill. Whilst the windmill has a chance to dry, I'm going to work on some of the surrounding foliage. I accidentally first took some nickel azo yellow from my palette, which was incorrect, and then I've added to it some rich green gold. That is a nice light green to put as a base layer, so I'm going to put that as the base layer on the bushes that are closest to the front. Once the base layer is down, I'll mix up a thicker consistency mix of the rich green gold and add that to the bottom area of the bushes. I will just tap the thicker consistency in at the bottom so that it makes it look like there's light hitting the bushes from the top with the shadow darker area at the bottom. Then I'm going to add some sap green into the mix to assist me with some dappled shadows on the bushes at the front. I'm going to work on the ground paving area. I'm going to start off by mixing up a bit of Venetian red, but I can see that that's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to knock back the color a little bit by firstly adding a bit of Payne's grey and then some neutral tint. That makes the color a whole lot less vibrant and more realistic in color. Then I don't want the ground to all be the same color. I want a little bit of contrast and shadow area, so I thicken up the Venetian red and just drop it around the base of the windmill. For the underside of the platform, I'm going to use neutral tint. This windmill's name is Molen de Koe, which means the cow windmill, and it is in the Netherlands town of Ermelo. The mill was originally built in 1871, but it burnt down completely in a fire in 1990. Nothing happened for the longest time, but it was rebuilt entirely in 2008. I'm going to use bits and pieces of whatever remains on my palette to finish off the blades of the windmill and then also all the other smaller pieces on the painting. If I add any additional colors, I will keep within the same palette of colors that I have used so far. You can't really see from the photograph, but this mill is actually octagonal in shape, meaning it's got 8 sides. We can only see 3 sides in the photograph here though. Every Saturday the mill is open for the public to view, and you can also see the mill in action on those days. Now that I'm absolutely sure that the lighter sides of the windmill are completely dry, I can now work on the side that has got the red bricks in it. I'm going to mix up Venetian red again, but I'm going to add some buff titanium to give it a bit of a milky consistency, and then I'll put that down in a light layer first, and then once that's down I will drop in some dots of the same color just to try and vary the texture on the surface. I will use a neutral tint for inside the window, and then I can see that the bolt at the center of the blades is blue. I'm just going to use a bit of Prussian blue for that. Now I'm going to work on the foliage a little bit more, and I've added some sap green to my green, and I will do the hedge with that. Then I will continue to move through all of the foliage from front to back, trying to vary the shade of green with each consecutive bush. Whatever color of green I put down, I then dot in some thicker consistency at the bottom to make it look like there's more shadow at the bottom, with sun shining onto the top of each of the trees or bushes. Landscapes and trees in the background always have a slightly bluish color to them when they are further in the distance. For that reason, I'm going to use Perylene green for the trees in the background. Perylene green is a much darker green with a bluish color in it compared to the greens that I've used for the trees in the foreground. I will use this darker green that's already on my brush to add a bit of shadow to the hedges. And I'll also add some shadows to the base of the trees in the background. Before I get onto my shadow layer, I'm just going to do one pass over the sketch and just fill in anything that I might have missed so far. I will use mostly neutral tint and just do things like the plaques on the wall, the railings, as well as the supporting struts under the platform. I will start with the most obvious shadows that I can see, using any shadow color that I've already got on my palette. I do a bit of a shadow around the base of the windmill, as well as the holes inside the millstones. And then I will add the shadow under the top edge of the windmill. Onto the shadow layer, I'm going to put down some water on the middle and right hand panels of the wall, as well as just under the platform on the left hand panel. Then I will drop in a light wash of neutral tint on the middle and right hand panels, and then once that's done, I'll come in with a thicker consistency of the neutral tint underneath the platform. I will then use water on my brush to fade the shadow from top to bottom. But in order to get some nice contrast, I'm making sure that the bulk of the left-hand panel remains without shadow, so that it will appear as though the light is shining onto that side. Now I want to add some shadow to the top half of the windmill. You will see that there aren't really any shadows in the photograph because it is a pretty cloudy day, but I want to add a bit more dimension to the sketch. So in my mind, the sunlight is coming from the left-hand side. So I'm going to start by putting down a layer of water on the top half, and then put some shadow color on the right-hand side, as well as under the top of the windmill. I'm now going to exaggerate the shadow on the right-hand side of the building by adding an additional layer to the panel on the right-hand side. I will also add a bit more to the shadows that the millstones cast on the ground. I was in two minds as to whether I was going to include any sky at all in the sketch, but decided that I would like a sky that is not detracting from the main sketch as a whole. I settled on the color lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is a granulating prematic paint from Daniel Smith. When put in quite a watery mix, it does separate into the different constituent colors, which I think is great for a sky. I'm just turning my page upside down in order to do this, because I find it easier to cut around the edges of the windmill if the page is upside down. And I'm less likely to touch the painting with the side of my hand. I realized that these support struts would cast shadow on the wall, so I'm going to add those in on the brightest side. I'm going to put in a shadow under the door frame and then add a cast shadow that the windmill would cast onto the ground. We're getting quite near to the end here. I'm just looking for any bits and pieces that I might have missed. I'm using some remaining color that's on my palette to put a little bit of a shadow on the panels of the windmill. I think we're close to done. Rather than trying to use paint to fill in the little arms on the side here, I'm just going to use my Micron pen to do that. Finally, I'm just going to add a cast shadow for the one strut that I have missed. And there's the final sketch. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, bye for now.